All right, I am. I'm in an airport right now, about to fly back to Seattle uh, from the South. I've been in Atlanta and I've been in Birmingham and Montgomery and Selma on a learning tour, which is something that we do. We go pretty deep on education at Common Power, but I've been essentially out of commission, man, since Wednesday. This is really to help catch me up. So we're gonna latest and greatest a little bit. But before I do that, let me just say the learning tour was surreal in some ways because some of the stuff that we were talking about, some of the history that we were learning, it didn't feel like history anymore. It didn't feel like something that was foreign. So there's a piece
Yeah.
specifically where we say that the Supreme Court ruled that the segregation was illegal, and then nobody would enforce it. The federal government wouldn't enforce it, and so the people had to start to force desegregation um, at the store level, at the transportation level, and so that's where the freedom rights come from. It comes from
Yep.
the courts ruling on something and the government doing nothing to enforce it and the people having to take it into their own hands. And so that it just I was like, we're there. That is where America is today. Supreme Court is making decisions about things. Trump administration is not moving on them. And so what do we do? And so we got to have these very um, salient, relevant lessons from history on what to do right now. And it felt useful. It felt more scary, I guess, because how real this was, how scary it seemed for them, and how connected to now it feels. So yeah, that's what I've been experiencing while I've been missing out on the day to day news. But run me through some of what I've been missing.
No, but I mean, I just want to, speak to how powerful that is. I mean, the fact that you're seeing the historical resonance, but also, I mean, we've kind of been through worse. We've been through harder times, and the people knew the law was on their side with these courts, and they acted, and they got results through these protests, right? So it kind of showcases that, maybe we'll get through it on the other side, but at the same time, also scary because it's like a return to the Jim Crow era, fear that we were living under back then, where especially with immigrants now, like I
Yeah.
remember last time I went to learning tour last year, and it was just I just kept feeling for what immigrants were potentially going to go through, and now that he's won, it's probably hit really hard. But all right, so while you've been gone, going into the history books, we have been dealing with just usual reverse Robin Hood behavior from Republicans. They are apparently in their Medicaid cuts and their plans to fund Trump's tax cuts. There's a new report from the New York Times that says it'll actually make poorer people worse off. So they're not getting the cuts this time. I actually have an analysis I can pull up from the New York
Isn't
Times.
it? I heard that there was like a 70% increase in taxes for people like under $20,000 or something crazy like that.
Yeah, it's not great. Let me pull this up.
Okay.
So New York Times, GOP tax bill may hurt the lowest earners and help the richest. And if we go down to this article, we can see people making between 51,000 and 17,000 a year, they could lose $700 on average and after tax income beginning in 2026. It's unbelievable. But if you're making over 4.3 million, you could gain 389,000.
Wow. Oh
So
my
it's
God.
it's literally a bill that will take money from the poor and give it to the rich.
That's
That's what
amazing,
the New
man.
York Times is indicating here. It is unbelievable, brazen, and meanwhile, Trump's telling us to ration baby dolls, right? Because the tariffs are coming. So it does not
Crazy.
look good for Republicans or Americans if this passes. So
Okay,
now,
so yeah, so what are our elected officials doing about this? What's the conversation like in Congress?
so Trump's on Capitol Hill today, and he's trying to basically pressure Senate Republicans to pass this thing. And we initially the problems were in the House that they didn't make deep enough cuts. That's what the Republicans were saying. And now that it's in the
I heard
Senate,
about
there are
that.
people who
Yeah.
have concerns about these Medicaid cuts. You had Josh Hawley talking about he doesn't want some of the Medicaid
Yep.
cuts being that steep. So there's going to be
Josh
deficits. Maybe
Hawley, the surprise
surprise
resistance leader.
populist
What?
resistance, bro. I guess
What is going on? You know,
it's
it
just
was us clowning on him for running through the hallways
yeah,
during
exactly.
during the J6 riot.
No, he's just got this fake populist bona fide thing going.
It does,
But
yeah.
interestingly as well, Rand Paul said he's talking about the deficit, and he's saying, why are we going to add $5 trillion to the debt? He said, where are the Doge cuts, which was interesting to see.
So Rand Paul, surprisingly maybe, but the most principled Republican in the Senate, hands down, full stop, the most principled.
Yeah.
Josh Hawley, definitely just angling for a future presidential run. That's it.
Yeah, and we'll hear what happens. I haven't heard from him, seen what he said today or since the House passing it. I know that's what he was referring to the bill beforehand. I mean, knowing them, they're probably eventually going to get this thing through for Trump, especially at least the tax cut portion of this. I'm not sure if they'll chop it up. Some of the House bill might be a no-go, but I think that we can expect probably the tax portion of this to at least get through. And we're going to see. I think Republicans are going to have to try to defend literal reverse Robin Hood is what I would call it if I was a Democratic lawmaker.
Yeah. And this is their like final act before they hand Congress back over to us. This is gonna, if they're looking for ways to lose definitively in the midterms, this is the way to do it. This is the final thread. Like there's, you destroy all these pieces of government that are helping people out, helping your own voters out, and then you push through one of the most regressive tax policies this country's ever seen, especially in modern times. This is it. This is it for them. And I understand there's some debate about if elections are going to be happening in the midterms. All that aside, assuming that we are going to have free and fair elections in 2018 or 2018 and 2026. This is how you lose them.
Yeah, and I think just on that note, I think we will have free and fair elections because also Republicans are behaving like we will. They're moving this fast because the way they're talking to reporters, they're saying we need to get this done because we think we're going to lose the midterms. That's what journalists are saying. That's a great point. They're hitting on background. They think they need to push this agenda through because they expect to lose. So there's not really secret machinations going on to rig this election. What they're doing right now is just trying to pass these bills through, and then they're going to get clocked. They want to make as much of these tax cuts permanent, and then I think we're seeing some more old school Republican behavior there, where they're trying to get this stuff through and recognizing that Donald is about to be a lame duck without a house in 2026, and then gearing up towards 2028. The way some of the stuff they're doing, trying to make some of these things permanent, I don't know. It seems like they're buffering potentially maybe even for a 2028 loss. So
right.
They're behaving as if they're going to lose in the coming elections. That's what I'm seeing.
Okay, so I don't want to talk about this anymore because it makes me sad.
Let's talk about the less sad topic of Joe Biden.
Which part of that though? The part where they lied about his health, or the part where it was worse than what they lied about, than what we discovered they lied about?
Well, the thing is, I had to think a lot about this because, as you know, a humble plug here. I went on CNN on Friday, Abby Phillips show.
You
first
did.
Time.
You
And
did, yeah.
What
time
audio,
was that on?
10 p.m. And the audio dropped out 2 hours before the Robert Hur tape of Biden hearing the interview. Dropped literally 2 hours before I went on. So they scrapped the A block that we initially had planned, and then just spent 15 minutes talking about this thing. I didn't really want to talk about it so I had to do a lot of thinking about this, and honestly, I just see it as a really sad human story.
Yeah.
Just like, and now knowing that he was battling cancer potentially for years because of how it's advanced, he might have had it for years. I don't
Yeah.
think he had this diagnosis and hid it. I think most people say people in the over 70, they just don't do the test. But
Mm.
I just think it puts everything into context, right? The exhaustion he had after jet lag leading up to the
Yeah.
debate, the way he walked, like his body was battling cancer that was in his bones, you know?
Yeah. 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 I mean, that's a good take, man. And it's tough to have a take 2 hours after news drops. Okay. So you had the hard job of like, no
I had to,
one's like verified
and
these
it's my
things and
first time,
told
and I'm
these
like,
things.
my first time on the show, and I'm like, what? Oh,
They're like, make an impression on us. Ahmed, go, ready to go. Okay, Abby Phillips show, right? I got to go look this up because I've been again heads down in Alabama. But so the one thing I'll say about that is that as president, you're required to do more doctors check-ins than normal. So I'd
yeah,
be surprised if they didn't already know about this. But the broader, that specific diagnosis aside, well, let me just say, I agree with you. For him to be somebody who's battling the kind of physical frictions, and still able to deliver the things he delivered during his term is amazing. And what he delivered is, that's not up for debate. Like that guy, this is one of the best presidents we've ever had. Best Democrats that's ever served in office, in any office, hands down. Okay. Um, the the thing about his health, though, in general, and our just now discovering about it is not good.
yeah,
It's not good, and it's a broader theme that runs across all of politics, where people who are have major health challenges that could impact their ability to govern continue to think that they need to stay there. This is why we're filling 2 House seats right now in the U.S. House, because
yeah.
2 people died who knew that they were sick, and they still ran for those seats, and they shouldn't have. And this is not like regular jobs. There are people that are always next up and competing for these. There's never, especially now, there's never nobody who's willing to come and govern in your place. So this is a broader story, I think. It reflects a broader story of uh, the older generation not making room for younger generations, just all the way up to where they could potentially pass away while they're in office. And it's just this is one of the reasons why we don't have people in office who understand AI, who we don't have people in office who understand social media, and then can make laws that protect us from the job losses and the influence in our children, that people who are parenting right now, that they would know better. And this is just there should be more turnover in our representative government.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree in the broader
And Joe
frame.
Biden shouldn't have run for president. I guess they bring it all the way around and put a period on it. He should not have run again.
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, clearly, I think it's one of those things where it would have he would have solidified indisputable legacy if he chose not to run for reelection. If he, obviously, I mean, he was battling cancer. Now we know he was battling old age, and just his ability to communicate his objectives and communicate his agenda just faltered over time. It's just what happens to us. We're humans, and I just think if he, and I don't blame him as much as I blame some of the people around him. And although, like, and all of this is to go to say, like, I love Joe Biden. I still have a lot of respect for him. I think a lot of people watching this are love him, and they're frustrated with CNN's obsession with it, or at Ted Jake Tappers and others. Some of them they're upset. They're angry at the journalists who cover it, right? But obviously but there is some truth to what they've covered, to what they've uncovered as well. Those journalists, and I just think we have to reconcile with the fact that he did make the wrong choice to run for re-election, and I think people around him that we all hope when we're old, when you and I are 70 or 80, if let's say we're working huge important jobs, we would hope our spouse or our close friends or our advisors wouldn't become sycophantic over those years, and that they would say, hey bro, when I go geezer mode, I want someone to tell me you're
It's
entering
game over.
you're entering geezer mode, and not like geezer, like not geezer is like expletive for people who are older. I'm talking like I'm talking because I know there's people who are older watching this, and you guys are great. I'm
They're
talking
like,
about like
wow,
if
Ahmed,
I
wow.
I'm talking about like if I were to like not be able to function anymore, I would hope
Yeah,
people would tell
yeah,
me, hey man, you should just go on a beach and retire. So I
yeah,
think that those people weren't around Biden to give him that heads up. I think he would have made the right decision. I think the 2022 midterm wins that Democrats had somehow made the
yeah.
Biden
It
admin
did.
think they had political strength they maybe
It
didn't
did.
have,
Yeah,
and it's really sucks because I think if he had announced I'm not running for re-election right after the midterm wins of the Dems, they would have had momentum to have a
yeah,
primary of a
yep,
lot of cool young Dems, and then
yep,
he would have just been able to say, "Hey, hands off the wheel. I beat Trump. I did all these bills. I'm I'm among the goats. I'm frankly
yeah,
among the goats."
yeah. We would have had more buy-in from our voters. We would have had candidates that were battle tested, and the public would have had more time and runway to get to know our eventual choice. Um,
Yeah.
that last point so what you're saying there though, I totally agree with that. The piece of there's more than just the public and the candidate. There's this class of people that's in that middle layer in between that has a lot of influence. There's there you hear about these older elected officials that Chuck Grassley, 91 years old again, right? Dianne Feinstein, these people who forget where their offices are. They're not writing bills. They're not doing research. Somebody else is doing this for them, and it needs to be said that there's a power play that maybe didn't involve just Biden. It was his people, and they were at the apex of their power, and they wanted to keep it.
Yes,
These
that's it.
people that keep these federal elected officials in office beyond their individual viability are protecting their own power as staff members
Yes,
attached to these people, and
that's
we got to
that's
get
the
rid of
take.
that part too.
That's the take. That's what where I don't have. I'm not angry at Joe himself. I think he didn't have the self. I think he did no longer have the self awareness. I think his body was
Mm,
battling cancer. I think he was fatigued. I think the people around him fucking failed him. And
mhm.
I feel like he's a good guy that deserved better. And I think,
Yeah.
and obviously, he's a sentient being, so he does deserve some of the blame. But I just think that you're right. There were people around him who were themselves finally getting their, he not only getting his childhood dream of being president, they all got their dreams, and they didn't want to give up power
Yeah.
themselves. And
Yeah.
that's what it is. And I think it just goes to show we need to elect people, empower people who aren't careerists, who are there for the right
Hmm.
reasons. You guys just knocked out Trump. There could have been some voices in there that said like, "Hey," but again, you know, it's there was like 4 or 5 people apparently at the top that was like insulating him from his cabinet
Oh
people.
yeah.
Like, so
Yeah.
it's not like there was hundreds. I think it was a core group
Yeah.
that really protect that. Like, we're like, okay, we're recognizing that he's losing his step a little bit. Let's insulate him. And again, just for people who are watching who might be frustrated that we're even talking about this, because I know a lot of people are.
Oh, are they?
It's just a lot of people, not at us, but yet maybe after they watch this, but they're upset at CNN. They're upset at the media. They're upset at journalists. They're talking about
Okay.
this, especially
Okay.
over this weekend. The main liberal stance right now online is anger at people who are discussing this, and
Really?
well, yeah, because they think they should be focusing on Trump, and I do think there's sometimes too
Okay.
much
Okay.
journalistic. There's sometimes too much journalistic interest in this, but I think
Mm.
for just to be honest, it is something we should reckon with, and I think we're
Well,
having the honest conversation about it.
well, and so what's not happening is a behind the scenes conversation where a select few people get to debate what happens on the left or in the Democratic Party. I think uh, 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 the unique feature of the Democratic Party or the left is that we're having this conversation in the open
Yeah,
with more transparency and in front of voters, and so it's a little messier, and it's a little we get dinged a little bit because we're having an argument in front of people, but it's also more honest, and it's more inclusive, and so you can't have both. You can't have it be secretive and inclusive. You can't be
Exactly.
big tent and also only have a few elite strategists that get to have a closed door conversation. So we got to decide who we are and what we want.
So, all in all, it's just, I think the Democrats are having an honest conversation amongst themselves. I think with the debate, everyone saw with their own eyes what was happening. And at the same time, I do agree. I think it shouldn't be the primary news cycle focus for like journalists. Personally, I think there's a lot of assaults on democracy to focus on. But I think within the Democratic Party, there is definitely a conversation to be had. It's being had right now. I think people are reckoning with what happened during the Biden administration, and I think even Buttigieg, like people, it's going to be something that's going to come up in the primary. So I think one thing that we do know we can't avoid is the conversation, because journalists are going to force it into the debate stage. When these primaries happen, this topic's going to come up, and I think there needs to be a narrative that Democrats craft an answer to this, not only to the journalists that ask these questions, but the voters. So we'll see what happens.